In this video series, I want to teach you how to fall in love with your sewing machine. So whether you are brand new and you're thinking sewing sounds like fun, or maybe you have a machine and it's still in the box, or you haven't sewn for a while because you're just not sure where to get started, I have got your back. I am going to help you fall in love with your machine in 5 easy steps. You're not going to get all distracted by Pinterest and all the different things. We're going to learn the machine, we're going to do some exercises, and then we're going to finish with a project or two to build your confidence. And then you can go from there and work on further things. But it's really important to just have a system to keep you focused and learn step by step. So I highly recommend that you watch these in order, go through the exercises, do the things I suggest you do, even if you're like, I'm just going to skip that one. There's a reason I put it in there, but if you want to skip it, that's fine too. I have been known to have that attitude at times. But anyway, it will always be here for you if you need it. There are also some checklists. There's the PDF. So it's time to fall in love with your sewing machine. Today, we are going to talk about your instruction manual. So I want you to get your manual out for your sewing machine. Also, print out this checklist from the PDF, how to fall in love with your sewing machine in 5 easy steps, so that we can go through these together and get this done. Now, on this skill sheet, I highly recommend you put your machine make and model, when you got it, where you got it, if that is relevant, and the bobbin size. Now, there's a whole nother video about bobbins. Your bobbin size might not actually be listed in your manual, or it may only tell the brand size, and then you might need to go to Google or whatever search engine you prefer. But you definitely want to have your bobbin size written down, so take a look at that video to learn more about bobbins. But this basically is going to go over all the facts that you need to know about your machine to be ready to sew. Some of them you're only going to have to look at once. Others, you might want to write the page number in your manual in case you need to refer back to it. These are kind of the basic things and the things that I occasionally go back to because I do use more than one sewing machine. So let's look through them. Your operation manual, they're all a little bit different depending on the machine and how many things they have in them, but they all have basic things. First, they have all the safety warnings and all of the things that they legally have to tell you about. Most importantly, sewing machines are not toys. They are dangerous. So take a look at those and proceed with caution. Then there is going to be a table of contents that gives you a quick guide to where to find different topics in your manual. And then also there's always going to be parts lists that shows you what comes with your machine. Sometimes it'll say optional, like they may use the same manual for more than one model. So it might say optional accessories that may or may not be included with your machine. That also applies to the things it tells you how to do. Sometimes it'll give you instructions for, well, your machine might do this and it might do that. So just figure out what your machine does. It should also give you a list of stitches. So most machines these days come with more than just a straight and a zigzag. It gives you a couple decorative stitch options. So usually they will show you a photo of that. The main things that you do need to know for your machine, and I'm going to assume that you're just getting it out of the box. If you aren't, just bear with me because you're going to know how to do some of these things. So make sure you know how to connect your power supply and connect your foot control. That usually just requires plugging 1 or 2 things in. So for example, this is my basic introductory level sewing machine, and it has one plug that plugs into the side of the machine like that. My power button is right there. The power button is usually very close to where you plug in your power supply. And connected to that plug, we have the power supply plug that goes into the wall and the foot control. So it's a 2-for-1. Plug one thing into the machine, this goes into the wall, you have power, and you can control your sewing. Now on my other machine, it has 2 different pieces. It has a power cord that plugs in, and then it also has the foot control that has its own cord and plugs into the side. So you just figure out from your manual and looking at your machine, which way yours works, because that's what matters to you, right? So once you know that, you can just check that off. And honestly, I wouldn't worry about writing what page that is, because once you know how to do it, you know how to do it. If you have other accessories that came with your machine or work with your machine, have a look at that. The other things that you need to know how to do are on the checklist: how to raise and lower your presser foot, how to change your presser foot, how to thread your machine, covered in another video, how to wind and insert your bobbin. I have a whole video in this course about bobbins. That's where you're going to learn how to find your bobbin size and also how to put it into your sewing machine and how to wind it. So if we go to this one, let's see, winding the bobbin, page 15. Let's take a look at what that looks like. So it gives great graphics, page 15. So just go through and find these. So let's see, replace the needle. Where do I have that? Yeah, change the needle, same thing. Page 7, changing the presser foot. So what I would recommend is go through your table of contents, write down all these pages, and then take a little bit of time and make sure you know how to do each of these skills. This is kind of your one-stop shop so that if you need to find something, you don't have to search through the entire manual. You can be like, okay, grab my manual, go to this page. This is my bobbin size, etc., etc. In today's video, we are going to talk about how to thread a sewing machine. And each sewing machine may be slightly different, but they all have very similar and important parts. So I'm going to show you how it might differ from machine to machine, starting with an introductory machine, and then I will show you more computerized higher level machines. It's really important when you get a new machine to use your manual. Make sure you are paying attention to all the steps that they tell you to take to get your thread going through there correctly. Because if your thread doesn't go through the system correctly, then your sewing is going to get all messed up. For example, had I not looked at these instructions, I would have thought, oh, I just put the thread on there. But this actually pulls up so that it holds the thread more securely. So I'm just going to put my thread right up there. Now, sewing machines either have their thread upright like this, or some of them have them like this, and then you need a little cap so that it doesn't fly off the side if you are sewing really quickly. So again, make sure you're always looking at your manual. Now this one says to make sure that our presser foot is raised, which it is. If it wasn't, we would just move this lever, raise that presser foot. You also want to make sure that the needle is raised. You never want to try and thread your machine when the needle is down into the bottom of the system. To move your needle on this machine, you're going to use the hand wheel. So as I turn here, this needle goes up and down. So on an entry-level machine, you're going to be doing that by hand. Some of the fancier ones, which I'll show you, will do that automatically. Now, the next thing we are going to do is we are going to thread it through the upper threader. So we're going to take this thread and we're going to pull it. We want to make sure it gets caught right in that little groove. Every machine has a guide that you start with. They all look a little bit differently. And there's also going to be diagrams on the top of your machine that are going to help walk you through this if you forget. Now we are going to bring this thread down, and it also has numbers on here. So we're going to follow the arrow for number 2. Number 3, we're going to pull it back up. And then we need to make sure that it gets into the thread uptake, which is not up at the moment. So I use the hand wheel to pull this little metal part up so that the thread would go through there. And then you're going to bring it down again. So our thread is coming down here. And then there's a little needle bar thread guide. So you're just going to put the thread behind that so you can see that the thread is coming down from here and it's going to be guided right there. We don't want it just floating around or it's going to make a big old mess. Then you're going to thread the needle from the front to the back. And you're going to have to do this manually. So you're going to want to make sure to cut your thread fresh so that it's kind of like hair, right? When you need a haircut, the end gets frayed. You're never going to get a frayed piece of thread through the hole of a needle. So I always cut it right before I do this. And then you're just going to put it straight through. When you're looking through your instruction manual, make sure you read a little bit ahead. So I was looking at the directions and going through, and it told me to manually put the thread through there. And I thought I bought one that had a threader. So I turned the page, and then it shows you how to use the needle threader if your machine has it, which mine does. Yay, hooray. So what you do is you pull this little lever down, and you push it. There's a little piece of metal there that is coming through the hole of the needle. So now I'm just going to take the thread, put it in front of there, and it hooks it, and it pulls it out the back. And now the top thread is in place on this sewing machine, from the spool, the guide, through the tension, down, and through the needle. This is my Janome Continental M7. It is a very industrial machine, and I believe the list price right now is about $8,000, but most places are selling it for about $5,000. So a very different price point, very different functionality. I'll go into more of all the pieces and how it works in a different video, but today we are just going to be talking about how to thread this versus how to thread that more beginner one. I'm going to thread black thread, so hopefully you can see it better than if I was threading white. Just like the other one, it has these spool holders over here. It has two, actually. So if you're doing a twin needle and wanted to do two colors, you could do that. You put it up through this guide, and then there is another guide right here. And then you pull it across. And just like the starter machine, there's diagrams on the top of the machine that show and remind you what you're doing. Then we're going to pull it over through this little guide, same function to the other one, but just has a different look to it. Then we're just going to go through these tension rods. We're going to follow the numbers and the arrows, which are easier to see on this machine. Go through a little thread guide, and this does have an automatic needle threader. So I pull it back through here, pull it up here, and I pull forward, and there's a little razor blade here that cuts that thread off. Then the next thing you do is you just push this lever down, and this should come down and pull it through that automatically. But I have found it doesn't work very well with my foot up. So I usually put the foot down because it gives more room for that to work with the needle. Sometimes it won't work even with the foot down, and that usually means I need to change my needle because it's not lined up, or tighten it, it's not lined up properly. But see how easy that was to get threaded. So this machine now, the top thread is all done and ready to go. You'll also notice that I didn't have to touch the hand wheel, which is way down there. I have a lot more room. I have buttons that will put the foot down, put the foot up, put the needle down, put the needle up for me. So you get a lot more automatic functions when you're spending this kind of money on a machine. So sewing machines either have a bobbin that loads from the top, like this one. And what I like about that is you can see it. So you have a visual as you're sewing and doing different things. Oh, I have tons of bobbin thread left, or I'm getting close to the end. So you aren't as surprised when you get to the end as you might be for a front-loading bobbin. I don't have any machines with front loading. I just have this photo to show you. But a front-loading one, you would basically pull this off, and this would be a door that would flap down, and there would be a metal case that held the bobbin that would go in this way. So it's just a different way that this bobbin sits in. Either sits in flat and you can see it from the top, or it sits in standing up and it goes from the side. So just learn what you have and how it works. Bobbins are made of three general things. There are metal bobbins, which are made of a treated steel. And there are aluminum bobbins, which to me sound like metal, but it's just a different kind of metal. They're lighter weight than the steel metal bobbins. They spin faster than both metal and plastic bobbins, so they're often referred to as quick wind. Because they spin faster, they will wind faster. The downside to aluminum bobbins is that they scratch and damage a little bit more easily than metal and plastic bobbins. These are both plastic bobbins, which to me seem to be the most common. They're becoming really common because they're durable, they're inexpensive, and they're light for shipping. And they generally perform as well as metal bobbins. So the best rule of thumb is to use whatever kind of bobbin material that your machine came with. Now, apparently, there are over 60 kinds of bobbins for various different sewing machines, from home machines to industrial machines, etc. The bobbin size, also known as a bobbin style, can vary, but there are three most common sizes for household machines. There's class 15, A style, which is what this one is, and which is what both my Janome and my brother use. The sides are completely flat, so there's no bend in either of these sides. And this size comes in both metal and plastic. Then there is an L style, which is also flat on the sides, but it's narrower. So the width of this is 8.9 millimeters versus 11.7 millimeters. So you'll see it is shorter. The L style comes in aluminum and also a Magna Glide core. Then there is also an M style, which are bigger than these. I don't have one. They're about the size of a quarter. They're large and flat. So this one, again, is 8.9 millimeters. This one is 11.7. And the M style, it's much bigger because it's the size of a quarter instead of a nickel, and it's 10.7 millimeters wide. If you have a machine with class 15 bobbin, make sure you're really careful and don't get a class 15J by mistake. It looks a lot like a class 15, but it's not flat. It has a slight curve on the plastic on the sides, and the width is slightly different. It cannot be used in a machine that needs a class 15 bobbin. Then there are some brands like Bernina, Juki, and Viking that have bobbins that are specifically made for their machines, but not all of their machines use the same bobbin because that would be way too easy, right? Now, one thing that I thought was really interesting was that this is the only manual I have that actually kind of shows me what size. So I went to the bobbin section and it says, we designed the bobbin that comes with this machine. If you use others, they might not work properly. And it gives you sizes. And then it gives you the brother part number. And I thought, I bet it's a common size. So I Googled and I said, what size bobbin works in the Brother MZ53 sewing machine? And I came up with this. So this is actually a class 15 bobbin. So you can use either the Brother version or any class 15 bobbin in this machine. I'm finding you really have to Google to find out what size you need for any given machine. For example, here is the manual for my Janome machine. And up here, it goes through all the parts. And it says, part 25, and it just says bobbin, that I got 5 with the machine. Okay, that's great. But what size are they? And here it gives me instructions for how to wind the bobbin. Important to know, each machine is a little bit different. And then here it shows me how to put the bobbin in, but it never tells me what size. In this entire manual, it doesn't tell me what size bobbin. Or if it does, I couldn't find it, and I looked for over 5 minutes. So I decided to just go to my friend Google, and it is a class 15. So perfect and awesome because I can use the same bobbins in both of my machines. So back to your manual again. Every manual is going to show you how to wind your bobbin. It's going to have lots of pictures, descriptions of how to put thread onto a bobbin so that you can use any color that you want as your bobbin thread. Most machines also have little diagrams, just like this one does, with the numbers, not only for threading, but for winding your bobbin. So we're going to put thread on here. And then I'm going to put a bobbin over here. We're just going to follow these directions. I have to go through this tension thing. Then I'm going to come around this way and then around this way. That's going to give us the tension that we need. I'm going to bring it over to the bobbin. Maybe I'm going to thread it through the hole before I put it on there. Yeah, that's much easier. Okay. Do whatever works. I'm going to pull that. And then it says to hold it straight up. Push the bobbin to the right so it goes over towards this little thing. Okay, so it's through the hole. I'm holding it straight up. I've pushed this over here, and then I'm going to gently press the foot so it winds a little bit, and then I'm going to cut this thread off that I'm holding. And then I'm going to just keep using the presser foot until that fills up. And then it will stop when it is full. So do pay attention because I kept trying to spin, but this had already stopped. Then you're just going to cut that off, pull that, and now I have beautifully wound bobbin thread to match this thread that is going to match the next project I'm planning on sewing. So each machine is a little bit different. The way this tension over here works, you may have a different guide here or here. Just look at what your machine does, and you can wind your own bobbins. This is a bag of pre-wound bobbins that I get from the sewing store where I bought my sewing machines, and they're just a huge time saver. Usually a pre-wound bobbin has 3 times as much thread on it than you can put on by winding the bobbin yourself. So I pretty much wind bobbins. I know I'm going to need color because I don't want to buy a whole pack of a specific color. You can buy pre-wound bobbins in colors and look at all the varieties. You can go to your local sewing shop. You can go online, do your research. Lots of ways to save a little bit of time and get these pre-wound bobbins. On this machine, it has a little picture right on here that shows you how to load the bobbin into the bobbin case in case you ever forget. The most important part is which side the thread is supposed to come off the bobbin before you drop it in. So you'll see it has a check mark with the thread coming off the left. I was taught, and I found this to be a really easy way to remember it, is when you hold it, you want it to look like a P. So the bobbin is the circle part and the thread is the stem of a lowercase p. It's backwards if it looks like a Q. And so on here, it shows you the thread coming off of the bottom. You want it coming off of the top. But I found the P idea to be super helpful. So I'm going to hold it in that direction. I'm just going to put it right down in the case. It just sits in there. It jiggles a little bit. And then it's going to show me how to thread it. Make sure it comes down below this little metal part, which is what's showing right there. Then it comes up, you can see right there, into here, and it cuts on there. And then I just push the little cover back on there, and it is good to go. Each machine is going to be a little bit different, but this one is really convenient. So if you're not using it a lot, it has the picture right there. The other thing that you can do is look at your instruction manuals. So this is the instruction manual for the same machine, and you'll see it covers the same thing, but in greater detail. So it has lots of pictures and also text about how to put this in. So the first time you're doing a machine, definitely do this. If you haven't used it for a while, refer back to your manual. The last thing I'm going to say about bobbins, who knew I had this much to say about bobbins, right, is get in the habit of inspecting your bobbin and your bobbin casing. So to really get this out, I would have to unscrew this needle plate. But every once in a while, just run your finger in here and make sure there are no big dings or there's nothing sticking out. Like, I don't know, if your needle hits wrong and it messes up the casing, that can affect how well your sewing works. The same with your bobbin. If somehow this is in there wrong and you get nicks on the side and this isn't nice and smooth, that can cause jamming. It can cause bird's nests. It can cause stitches to skip. So if you ever feel anything really weird, time to get rid of that bobbin, grab a new one. All right, so those are the main things that you need to know about bobbins. Now let's talk about cleaning your machine. It is so important. Sewing, as you know, creates a lot of lint from the cut edge of the fabric to fleece and batting or whatever, depending on what you're sewing. So if you're doing quilts, you're going to have to clean your machine more often than if you're just sewing traditional fabric together. But each machine comes with some cleaning tools. Mine came with this little brush. And then I recently got this brush because it just feels like it's going to get a lot more out than this one. So we're going to test this one together. I got a pack of these to try as well, which look like itty bitty Q-tips. So we're just going to see if we can kind of get some lint out with those without leaving any of this in our machine. So we'll try that together as well. Tweezers, just in case I need to pull a chunk out. And then I also have sewing machine oil that I got from the store where I bought my machine. Finally, I have just a microfiber cloth. This is what I use for cleaning glasses, my LCD screen. It's the same kind you get at Costco every time you get new glasses, assuming you have glasses. So anything like that that's not going to leave lint. So make sure you're always looking at your manual. They give you instructions for how to take the pieces apart, what things to make sure you're really cleaning. Your manual will have things specific to your sewing machine. So the first thing that I am going to do is I'm going to lock my machine. Usually they want you to turn them off, but I can't get this plate off without having my machine on. Yours may be that easy. It may not be as easy. You may need to use a screwdriver to get it open, but your manual will tell you how to access everything that is in the bottom. Then I am going to take this foot off. It'll just be one less thing in my way as I'm trying to clean. I'm going to put a piece of scrap fabric over top of the bottom part because I'm going to take this brush and I'm just going to really get all this dust off up here. And I don't want to be putting it into my machine if I can help it, less cleaning for me later. So this way it will fall onto this fabric. Just get that really clean. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the casing for the bobbin out. So that just comes out like that. And then I'm going to pull the bobbin out of there. And you can see that's pretty dusty too. So I'm going to get my fabric back and I'm going to start by just using this brush, kind of get some of that dust out. So right here is where the top thread comes out and loops with the bobbin. So we need to make sure that's not full of lint and not dusty and everything like that, both on the outside and on the inside. They then recommend that you take a cloth and make sure you wipe that out, the inside and the out. Just really make sure you're getting that nice and clean. You also want to be cleaning your feed dogs. See, you remember the little teeth that move back and forth? They can get really full of fuzz. I mean, sometimes if you aren't cleaning your machine regularly, that can get completely full and you can have fuzz that's as tall as those feet, and then they're just not going to work as well. But see all that fuzz that I just took off of there? I usually clean from top to bottom because I know that when I'm pushing up here, it's going to pop around and end up down here. So you just want to go wherever you can reach. Now, some people will recommend using compressed air and kind of blowing at your machine. And it looks like you're cleaning it really well because a bunch of stuff will like fly out. But the people that repair machines and do the maintenance on them say, please, please, please don't do that. Because some of it is flying out and some of it you're really pushing into areas of your machine where it's very hard to get out. And it can cause you more problems having it stuck there than just having a little bit more that is kind of free floating, if that makes sense. So that is my latest understanding on that. So I would not recommend using compressed air. Just kind of be patient and move your little things around until you get as much of that out as you can. About your machine at a sewing store, take advantage of any help they're willing to give you. When I bought this machine, I think I could take up to 10 private lessons, and they just showed me everything. They're like, okay, here's how you're going to thread this machine. Here's how you're going to clean this machine. Here's how you're going to oil this machine. So they just showed me all the basic operational things and gave me tips and tricks that I just wouldn't have figured out otherwise. I do like to stand up and kind of look down from the top and do a visual and see if there's any big clumps that I need to get with my tweezers, but it's looking pretty good. Now, when it comes to oil, different machines need different things. So again, check your manual and see what it tells you. A lot of the oil for sewing machines has like the regular tube, and then it has this skinny part. You're going to pull that off. You can pull this out, and then it allows it to bend so that you can be very precise with a drop or two of oil exactly where you want it. Okay, so now we have all the dirt out. Now we have to put all the pieces back in. So again, look at your manual. In this quick video, I'm just going to show you a demonstration of what you do with a general presser foot. This is your most versatile foot, and it basically has a really big open section here so that your needle can move around and do fun decorative stitches. This is the foot that you would use for zigzag, for other kinds of decorative stitches, and depending on your machine, it might look a little bit different. You'll also have different options for your sewing machine. Let's just take a quick look at what this does. It's pretty self-explanatory. Just remember that this is your most versatile foot because it's got lots of space for your needle to move around and do fun things. So I'm going to put my foot down, and then on this machine, each machine is a little bit different for how it organizes these stitches. You just turn to the number of the stitch that you want. So let's say we just want to do a simple zigzag. I'm going to turn this so that the dial is on number 3. So you'll see the needle is going back and forth, and it is creating a zigzag stitch. We'll try one more, and that is how simple your general purpose foot is. It's the most versatile of all of your sewing machine presser feet. These are fun to put on projects, use on quilting, whatever you want to do to make your sewing projects a little bit more decorative. I was going to do the 1/4-inch foot and a walking foot as 2 separate videos, but I decided it would be quickest and most efficient to show you them at the same time. So this is a regular 1/4-inch foot where the needle will be exactly a 1/4 inch from the edge of the foot, so you can use the edge of the foot as a guide when you're sewing. This one will work great if you're doing pretty thin fabrics, maybe 2 or 3 fabrics at a time. Once you get thicker where you're doing multiple layers of fabric and you're doing batting and things like that, a walking foot is really going to come in handy. Now you'll see the front is exactly the same shape because again, the needle will be a 1/4 inch from the edge of this foot. But it has this extra feature. So this part catches just like the feed dogs catch on the bottom of the fabric. this is going to move the top of the fabric. So instead of just having the fabric moving from the bottom, you're going to have the top and the bottom being moved along by your machine. Each company's walking foot looks a little bit different. This is how my Janome Continental looks. The brother that I bought that connects to the other machine looks like this. And you hook it onto the machine. It's a general purpose foot that has the walking foot feature, so that can work great when you're doing thicker fabrics. But I'm going to show you on my Janome how this compares to this, and we're going to add different layers of fabric and see how that works. So let's take a look in real life. This foot is exactly 1/4 inch from the tip of the needle to the edge of the foot. So instead of having to try and look at all of these lines over here, I can just line my fabric up right on the edge of the fabric. See, so you can't see the fabric, but it's not over here. It's just lined up right with that edge. And when I sew, it will be 1/4 inch from the edge of the fabric. Now, when do you use 1/4 inch seams? I use them, honestly, in almost everything. So here's an example. Quilters are always using 1/4 inch or a scant 1/4 inch seam, but we're not even going to worry about scant 1/4 inch seams at this point. So when you're doing a quilt block, you're putting a lot of different pieces together. So you want these seams to be big enough that there's a little bit of overlap, but not so big that it gets really crazy, especially where lots of pieces come together. Here's another example where we have lots of 1/4 inch seams, and it gets a little bit thick when you get into points like this, like where the tail is meaning this is from a fish block. So you don't want to have, 1/2 inch of fabric on either side of something like this. I also find 1/4 inch seams just to be a great way to sew pretty much anything together. So unless you're doing something that specifically calls for a wider seam, I would just go with the 1/4 inch. So this is just a basic 1/4 inch foot. It's not a walking foot. You saw that it sewed really nicely when we just did the 1 layer. Now let's do 2, and I'm going to show you that that's going to work really well too, because the movement of the walking feet when you're just using 2 thin pieces of fabric is going to be just fine. We get into a little bit more issue when you're doing something thicker. Okay, so we sewed these 2 pieces of cotton quilting fabric together with a 1/4 inch seam. They stayed together. Nothing is puckered. It went nice and consistently. So that works fine for something like that. Now let's add a little bit of bulk. So I have 2 more pieces of fabric, and let's put some batting in between. And this could be for any kind of a project. You could be quilting, you could be doing a mug rug, anything like that. Lots and lots of things. You could be making a quilted tote bag. There's lots of times where you're going to put a batting, which is thicker and fluffier than just a plain fabric, in between 2 pieces of fabric. So now we're getting a little bit more bulk going. And I'm going to put that, I'm just going to put it right in the middle. Let's see how well this sews with just a regular 1/4 inch foot. So now let's pretend we're going to bind this. So when you're doing binding, you're adding 2 more layers of fabric, because binding is a piece of fabric folded in half. Now let's see if the regular foot can do pretty well with 4 layers of fabric and 1 layer of batting. Part of the reason this is working pretty well is because this is a pretty small piece of fabric. When I have tried this without a walking foot for something long, like maybe 20, 30 inches long for a table runner, this starts to buckle and everything isn't moving at the same time. But this one worked pretty well. Now let's turn this over and we will sew here. So now we have 2, 4, 6 layers of fabric and 1 layer of batting. And I'm going to sew 1/4 inch from the fold on this side. So this is the one we did without the walking foot. Now I'm going to put a walking foot on here. And basically the walking foot is adding, similar to feed dogs right there. See, it's going to be gripping, and that is going to move back and forth to help move the top layer of fabric at the same time as the bottom layer. And it should give us an easier stitch. Although, like I said, the last one didn't look so bad because it was pretty short. But you will see it's a little bit puckered here. So let's try this again on the other side. So now I'm going to sew 1/4 inch from this edge with the 2 fabrics and the 1 batting. So there's that. And now we are going to add the binding. So now we have 4 layers of fabric and 1 layer of batting. And I'm not being super precise, and I'm not worrying about pulling the thread up or knotting because this is just a demonstration. Now I'm going to turn that over and we're going to sew a 1/4 inch from the fold on this side, but this time with the walking foot. Now you can really see a little bit of a difference. So see how this is a little bit puckered. This was the side where we didn't have the walking foot and the things didn't move quite as evenly. This side, well, it doesn't look even to that fold because I didn't fold it really well. It's nice and flat. You can kind of see the difference on this small of a piece, but you can imagine that if you were doing something a lot bigger, you would have a much more noticeable puckering on this side with no walking foot than on this side with the walking foot when that movement compounds. Now, sewing straight might seem obvious, but it is worth giving it some practice. You can use this sheet that you can print out from your PDF, How to Fall in Love with Your Sewing Machine in 5 Easy Steps, or you can use some scraps of fabric. And I'm going to show you both ways really quickly. So if you're going to be using the paper, the goal is just to sew along these lines. So you're going to put it into your sewing machine, put your presser foot down, and then lower your needle and make sure you are starting on that line. Then simply sew and get a feel for how you need to just kind of guide. You're not pushing hard or pulling. You're just gently keeping the paper lined up so that everything moves straight. Your feed dogs, which are the little jiggy-jaggy things underneath the foot, are what are going to be moving this paper. It's kind of like when you learn to write. Kids get these practice sheets and they just go along. So I'm using red thread so that we can see it. So you can see I did a pretty good job going straight. There are lots of lines on there if you want to practice. And this is just a good way to not use up your fabric. So once you get good at that, then I would recommend you get some fabric and start practicing with that and practice using these guidelines for your seam allowances. There's a little mark on my sewing machine on this bobbin cover. It's kind of hard to see. That is the 1/4 inch mark. Most of my projects use a 1/4 inch seam. So I would recommend practicing doing a 1/4 inch seam. I am going to be looking at this line and making sure the edge of my fabric stays on that line. Okay, so you can see that red sewn line. And let's just grab a ruler and see if I did actually get a 1/4 inch seam. I love this ruler from Riley Blake because the blue is exactly a 1/4 inch. So this is actually bigger than a 1/4 inch. When you start doing projects, you're going to want to know exactly where on your sewing machine you need to be lined up to get that 1/4 inch seam. It won't matter a ton on simpler projects like key fobs and things like that, but if you get into quilting blocks, it's going to be very, very important that you have very accurate seams. So now you can just continue and practice, maybe doing some of these other markings for seam allowance. Now, one other thing that I want to show you that is really helpful when you're just beginning is using tape. You can use painter's tape, you can use masking tape, you can also use this craft tape. It's called washi tape. It comes in lots of different colors and patterns. It's pretty inexpensive. You can find it in most craft stores, and it doesn't have a lot of stickiness to it. So it'll stay, but it won't leave residue on your sewing machine. So let's say I wanted a longer line and something a bit more visible for that 5/8 inch. I would just put that down, and then I would take a ruler and line it up on the line on my sewing machine and just make sure that I put that down straight. So you'll see that is going to be a lot easier to follow when you're sewing than the line on the metal. It's going to come further as well. So one important thing when you're sewing straight is don't look at your needle. You're going to want to look in front of your foot or to the side and be really watching where that edge is, because when you start looking at your needle, you might twist this and might not keep it as straight. So as I'm sewing, I am not looking here. I am keeping my eye focused here. That is how I recommend practicing straight lines. Start with the paper just to make sure you're good at keeping the machine and the paper going straight. And when you're doing paper, you are going to be looking at your needle. When you move to some practice fabric, you're going to stop looking at your needle and you're going to be paying attention to the edge of your fabric and your guidelines. So there's tons and tons of straight stitching in sewing. There's many projects where that's all you need to do. So getting really good at it and making sure you can stay straight from the edge of your fabric to whatever the seam allowance is worth a little bit of time and practice. In this video, we are going to talk about stitch length, what it means and why it matters. And we are going to be talking about basic stitch length. So if you're stitching just a straight stitch, We can talk about stitch length and width when we get into zigzag or decorative stitches, but for now, the first thing to know is that stitch lengths for sewing are measured in millimeters. Each sewing machine has a baseline preset stitch length. So if you don't change it, it's going to be what they set it to. On my machine, it's 2.4. I have also seen it set to 2.5 or 2.6. Have a look in your manual or have a look at your machine and see what your default stitch length is. The bigger the number, the longer the stitch. The smaller the number, the shorter the stitch. You're going to use longer stitches in these types of scenarios. This is not an exhaustive list of scenarios, but some basic ones that you will encounter. You're going to use your longest stitch for basting. And basting is basically when you just want to put in temporary stitches to hold things in place. Usually those stitches will either be cut off or taken out later. They're not permanent stitches for your project. You also will use a longer stitch with heavier fabrics or for more decorative than functional top stitching or quilting. Smaller stitches are used for curves, for piecing fabrics together, like if you're putting quilt blocks together, or for delicate fabrics. So let's just take a look at some examples of stitch length. So first, I'm going to do my default stitch length. So this is going to be a 2.4. So 2.4 millimeters between each stitch. So each time the needle goes into the fabric, then it moves forward, 2.4 millimeters, moves forward, moves forward, moves forward. So that is my basic stitch length, a 2.4. Now let's see how big we can get my stitch length. So I'm turning my dial to change the stitch length. Now this is the longest stitch. So this is what I use for basting, or if I just really am using something really heavy and need this long stitch. So you can see a definite difference. So basically for every one stitch at my longest, I'm getting 2 stitches over here. Now let's look at something smaller. If I am sewing curves or I'm piecing small pieces together for quilting, things like that, I'm going to use a 1.8 or a 2.0. So let's take a look at a 1.8. So that is a 1.8. So you can definitely see the difference. Much shorter, your needle is going in and out of the fabric a lot more. This is your biggest. This is the standard, 2.4. You could print out and use these practice sheets for sewing corners. It has 90-degree corners in both directions. And then on the bottom, it has kind of a zigzag corner. But I consider a corner anything that doesn't curve, right? So it's not a smooth transition. You're going to come down, you're going to stop, you're going to lift your presser foot, keep your needle down, and you're going to turn, whether it's a 90-degree angle or something a little bit shorter. So you're doing a straight line and then you want to stop with your needle right at that point. I'm going to lift my foot, turn, make sure my foot is going in the direction of the next line and keep going. So I'm putting my stitch length down to like a 2.4, 2.5. That's very standard for most sewing machines. We're going to try it again and go slower as you reach your corner so that you don't overshoot. So this works a lot better. I'm going to lift, I'm going to turn, and I'm just going to keep practicing. You get the idea. You can do that on both of these or on this bottom angled one. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you a few ways to sew an outside corner and a few ways to trim that corner to get your best results possible. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to sew 1/4 inch from the edge, so 1/4 inch seam, down one side. I'm going to stop, lift my foot, pivot, and come down the other side. Now, knowing when to stop and pivot is pretty important. I have a 1/4 inch foot on here, and it has little markings that show you where that 1/4 inch is. So I just wait and I line up the edge of the fabric with this line, and then I know that's time to turn. You can also use markings on your plate. So I'm going to lift the foot, keep the needle down, and I'm going to turn that. I'm going to put the foot down, and I'm going to make sure I'm where I want to be. I'm going to do another one in the same way because I want to show you 2 different ways to trim this. So let's just sew this together really quickly. Now for this square, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to sew straight down, and then just before that 1/4 inch where we would turn and sew again, we're going to turn 45 degrees, take 1 stitch, turn, and go again. And I'm going to show you the difference that that's going to make when you turn that corner right side out. Lift your presser foot, turn 45 degrees, take one stitch, lift and turn, and then do your next line. So the difference is very subtle. This one we just lifted and turned, and this one does have one stitch at an angle, and that is going to make a difference when we trim and turn this right side out. So I'm going to do one more like that so we can compare and contrast the trimming methods with the sewing methods. Now we have 5 corners sewn so that I can show you all the different variations. 3 where I just went straight, pivoted, and straight, and 2 where I did that 45-degree angle 1 stitch. Now the first one, this is kind of our control if we're doing an experiment. We're not going to cut anything. We're just going to turn it and press it and see what happens. I am going to use a turning tool, isn't it cute? And this is basically, it's, kind of angled. It's got a little bit of a point, not too sharp, but this is great for pressing those seams out and just kind of very gently poking at that corner to push it out as best as we can. Now, if you don't have a specific turning tool, that's totally fine. You could use the tip of a pencil. You could use a chopstick, anything that you can use to just kind of poke and press gently again in that corner. You don't want to use scissors because it's going to be really easy for you to push through that and cut your fabric. So that's why you go gently, and that's why you use something with a slightly blunt point. So now I'm just going to use my fingers and press this seam out because we want to make sure seam is right on the edge and that, there isn't a little bit of fabric folded under. We want a nice 90-degree angle. So taking the time to make sure this is right before you hit it with the iron is also going to help your end result. Okay, so that is our control. You can see it better on this side. So this is our control. It's not a very good point. And the reason is because we didn't cut anything. So we have all of this fabric here that's trying to fold up and bunch into this little section here. And honestly, it just doesn't work. It's like trying to wear pants that are too tight. It's just not going to look great. So that's our control. Now let's look at 2 different ways that we can trim that fabric off so that our point is going to be better. The most common way is to just go at a 45-degree angle and cut that tip off. Like that, okay? So let's see how that looks. I made some labels to put on top of these so we remember what is what without having to open them back up. So this one, we did the straight stitching. Sorry, that's not perfectly straight. And we cut at an angle. So I'm going to move that over there. And now here is our third one. And this time we're going to cut at a different angle. So instead of cutting once at a 45-degree angle, we're going to cut twice and we're going to come down here further. Always making sure you do not cut your stitches. So we're going to cut like that. And then we're going to cut like that. So that's basically removing even more fabric that would have to fit into that corner there. So let's see how that works. Still not a perfect point, but not too bad. So let's compare these first 3. This one, not trimmed at all. This one, cut at the angle, and this one cut at this angle. And if we put them right next to each other, let's see what we think. So definitely doing these 2 cuts is the best of the 3, but they're all still a little rounded. Let's see if the ones where we did at an angle turned out better. So we're going to do the same 2 cuts and compare. So we're going to cut straight across. That's already looking better than the other 3. And then we're going to do the 2 cuts, see how that works. I think we have a winner by doing that 1 extra stitch and the 2 different angled cuts. You're going to get your best point. There are 5 corners, 2 different ways of stitching, 2 different ways of trimming or not trimming at all. And you can see that those little steps make a huge difference. This definitely takes a little bit of practice to know when to stop to be able to get that angle, but I think it is worth it. So that is how you do outside corners. Happy sewing. In this video, we're going to be doing an inside corner, which is one of your harder corners, but it's doable. So let's get started. I would normally use white thread, but I'm going to use black so that it is easier to see on this example. I've drawn a line that is 1/4 inch in from the edge just to help me know where I'm going to be pivoting. We're going to go straight down, pivot, and sew across. So you just want to slow down as you get to your pivot point where that 1/4 inch mark is, and just so that you don't overshoot. And you want to leave your needle in the down position. Then you're going to lift your foot, turn your fabric. If you turn and you realize that you're not going to be on the line, just pick it back up, turn it back, and go one more stitch. And sometimes I will just use the hand wheel on the side of my sewing machine to do that last one, just in case using my foot goes more than one stitch. Now we are where we need to be. So we're just going to finish going down this line. So this is the first one. We sewed straight down, pivoted, and sewed across the side. Now on this one, we're going to do something just a teeny bit different. Instead of coming down and pivoting the 90 degrees, we're going to come down almost to that line, and then we're going to turn 45 degrees, do one stitch across, and then turn and go this way. Okay, so my needle is just probably one stitch before that line. So I'm going to lift my presser foot, turn 45 degrees, do one stitch. Now I'm going to lift again, and I'm going to turn, and I'm going to go on this side. So now we have one with the one angled stitch and the other with no angle. So just you can definitely see the difference. And let's go see the difference when we clip and flip that. I sewed two where I went straight down, pivoted, and straight across so that we can have a control that we don't clip at all and see how awful that is. And then the one where we came down and went at a slight angle and across. So let's start with our control where we sew it and we don't clip anything. So we relieve no pressure of the fabric in here and see if it works at all. Now you can see that is just a big old mangled mess, but we'll press it anyway. But it's pinched and it's a mess because we didn't clip anything here. And so it's just not able to be good. I mean, look at that side, it's even worse. So that is our control. Now let's take this one where we just went two straight lines, did a very nice point. We're going to take our scissors and we're just going to cut from the corner to just before the stitch line. Do not cut those stitches. So we have clipped that to relieve that pressure. So now let's turn and press this and see how this one works out. It's still bunching a little bit. This is why I don't like inside corner projects, but all right, so it's still pinched, but it's a lot better than this one. So now let's try the one with the angle, and hopefully this will be the ticket to success. Okay, so we just do the one clip. Look at that. Oh my gosh. That one stitch made a world of difference. So here are the three. So this one we sewed, we didn't clip at all. Put that little tag there for this one. This one we went straight, and it gave us quite the little bend there. And then this one, we did the one angled stitch, and it is so much better. Oh my gosh, look at that difference. So it's all in the technique, and it is all in taking the time to do those little things that are going to make your sewing look that much more professional. So that is how you sew and clip an inside corner. If you guessed that there was a practice sheet for curves as well, you are right. So this one has a few different curves. If you're going to use the paper and not just practice on fabric, I would start by practicing on these looser curves. It's going to be a lot easier to learn to follow a very shallow curve than one like this, which has more of a curve to it, and the circle has even more of a curve. So do this one first, then this one, and then this one. Now for curves, you want to do a smaller stitch length. I usually do between 1.5 and 2, usually about 1.8 to 2. Depending on your machine, you're going to be able to tell with that much accuracy or just kind of go in between 1.5 and 2 on your dial. The reason you want a small stitch length is because that's going to have the needle going in and out of the paper more often so that you can make that curve without having to stop. But sometimes on a tighter curve, you're not going to quite be able to pivot the way you need to. So you're just going to stop, lift your presser foot, keep your needle down, and turn slightly the same way we did with the corners, but just turning a teeny, teeny bit. So let's see how this works. So with about a 1.8, this was easy to do. It was easy to guide my paper and turn it. I wasn't pushing or pulling. I was just kind of guiding the paper. And I was able to stay on that curve quite nicely. Not perfectly, but quite nicely. So now let's see if we can do this curve without having to lift our presser foot. I'm guessing down here we're going to have to, but let's look and see. All right, nope, I didn't have to lift. That curve was big enough. My stitch length was small enough that worked out as well. Now let's do a curve. This is called a concave curve. If you don't want to remember those names, just remember outside curve because the curve is on the outside of the fabric versus an inside curve if the curve was coming this way. I think that's much easier. So for this one, I'm going to sew down these straight sides and also go across. I'm going to use my 1/4 inch presser foot as a guide to do a 1/4 inch seam. I was going to talk about stitch length. I didn't change it. I got distracted. So this is still a 2.4. It's a little bit long for a curve. So I'm going to change it now to a 1.8, and then you'll be able to see the difference. And when you're doing curves, especially the tighter the curve, the smaller the stitch length you want, because that's going to give you more points along that curve where the needle goes in and out of the fabric. And that is going to allow you to have a much smoother curve when you turn it right side out and press it. So I'm going to sew the other one because I am going to show you 2 different ways to trim along the curve to get that nice curve going. And as I sew, you'll notice I'm having my whole hand down. I just like to kind of keep it and help the fabric stay together and move together. I'm not pushing or pulling it. I'm just kind of keeping the fabric in line with my hand. All right, we have 2 concave / outside curves done. We'll go get clipping on those. So we have 2 sewn together. Now on an outside curve, you're going to do what they call notching. And notching is basically cutting out triangles of fabric along the curve. You see it a lot in patterns for clothing. So this is one way to do it, is you're just going to go with your scissors. Don't cut the stitching, and you're going to go all the way along, and you're going to do that. I find that to be a little more time consuming and tedious and a little bit harder on my hand than I would like it to be. Now you also have a bit of a corner here. It's not a straight corner, but it's still a corner. So you do still want to take a bit of that fabric out because you don't want too much fabric going in there. And you want to do that on both sides. Basically do a big old notch right there. For a little bit of an investment in pinking shears, it all goes so much faster. And I love this Fiskars brand because I like how you squeeze it so it's not as hard on your thumb and your tendon as you even using bigger scissors like this. It just really changes the way any scissor that I can buy from them, and this is not a paid advertisement. I've been using their scissors that I can squeeze versus like this for over 20 years. So highly recommend getting these pinking shears or any pinking shears because look, pinking shears is basically creating a notch. It's smaller than what I created in the 1/4 inch seam allowance, but that's okay. So what I'm going to do is I am just going to pink right along close to that stitch line, but don't pink your, I guess that's the verb, right? Pink. Don't cut your stitching. Look at how much faster that was to do. Now let's see how they look turned. Now you can just push that out with your fingers. You can use the turning tool You kind of lay it flat and just kind of push that along that stitch line. And then again, you're just kind of use your fingers and push that so that it's out nice and smooth. And then we're going to press. This is a great shape for pot holders, for flaps, for purses and little bags. Lots of fun things we can make with this shape. So look at what a nice curve that gave us. I'm assuming this is going to as well. It was just harder on my hand to do it, but let's take a peek. And sometimes just taking the time to really finesse and make sure that that seam is on the absolute outer edge and not kind of tucked like that is going to be the secret to success for these curves as much as how you sewed and clipped it. So that is our concave / outside curve. And this video is a convex or inside curve. If you want to learn all the geometry lingo, go for it. This is the convex. I like to call it an inside curve. So we're just going to come to a 1/4 inch from here. We're using a small stitch length because we want to get that curve nice and smooth when we turn it the opposite direction. Now, sometimes on a curve like this, you're letting the feed dog move the fabric. And I also have a walking foot that is helping move the top fabric, but it still doesn't feel like it's going to go to the curve as nicely as you want it to without really pushing and pulling. So at that point, it's fine to lift your presser foot and just twist it a teeny bit. You don't want to twist it that much or you're going to have a weird kink in your curve. But if you just need to twist it a little bit to keep that presser foot lined up, you are still going to be good to go. Now I'm going to do the other one because I'm going to show you 2 ways to clip this inside curve. So let's look at how to cut that. You need to relieve the pressure. So we're going to either go straight across or I'm going to do the 90-degree cut on this corner and on this one because we're trying to alleviate how much fabric needs to be right in here. And then we need to make sure that the fabric will turn and it will have some give to give us that curve. This is where you can clip. I'm going to do half of it notched and half of it clipped. And then we will compare and contrast together. Clipped, little lines, and notched. And then on this one, I'm going to use my pinking shears. And now let's turn these right side out. And just like with the other curves, just taking the time to make sure you have these seams pressed out really well and you're matching up your other raw edges, if you can see them, is going to give you a better result than if you're just kind of fast and like, let me just iron that. Okay, so there's that one. And now our pinking shears one. I always do the points first if I have both points and a curve. Get those points out as best I can. This is the pinking shear one. We'll put the pinking shears over here so we remember. They're both good. They both have a nice clean curve. It's just a matter of which kind of scissors we used to clip the fabric. And I can't tell the difference from where I clipped and did the little lines versus notched on this side. So you can do either one. Like most sewing skills, the more you practice, the better you will get at this. Just keep some of these tips in mind so that your projects turn out as best as they can. Happy sewing. So now that you've done some practice, what is next? What kind of projects should you do to gain confidence and improve your skills? The thing that I recommend to people is do things that only require straight cutting and straight stitching so that you can work on those skills, gain your confidence, and then move on to other things. One of the big problems that I see is people will go on Pinterest, even if they're starting quilting, if they're starting sewing, and they'll find something that's beautiful, but pretty advanced. And so then if they try that, they feel bad about themselves. They decide they can't do it. They put their sewing machine away and it gathers dust. So make sure you're starting with starter projects. Here are a few, and I'm going to put links to those tutorials in the video description. So one really easy and quick win is to make coasters. This is made with 5 squares of fabric and a little piece of fleece. You're going to be ironing them in half, stitching around, unfolding it, and stitching. Super easy, great for gifts, great for your own use, and an easy win. You can also make them larger in a rectangle. This is called a mug rug because it's shaped like a rug, and you have room for like a mug and a little snack. So same concept, nice and easy. This is another thing that I love. It's a nail file holder. I was so tired of having nail files in my purse, and then I go to grab something and I'm scratching my nails. Not the point. So this is just really easy, straight cutting, straight stitching. Also a great gift or a great thing to sew and sell if you're looking to eventually make money from sewing. Another one is a simple drawstring bag. It is one piece of fabric. You just need a piece of string, some fabric, straight stitching. So I'm going to put a link to that below the video as well. Got 2 more ideas for you. If you have a dog, how about an over-the-collar dog bandana? It is made out of 1 square of fabric. You're folding, cutting, and sewing it, and I will show you how easy that is to do. Again, the link in the description. And finally, if you want to sew something really easy for a baby, how about turning a cloth diaper into a much cuter burp cloth? All I did was put a simple strip of fabric on that most absorbent part, and moms love these because it's going to protect your clothes and it is nice and absorbent if anything comes out of baby. So those are a few of my first suggestions. Make sure you subscribe to my channel. I've got tons and tons of tutorials and lots of easy sewing projects, and I'm excited to help you on your journey to sewing and quilting.